Okay, welcome everyone. This is our sixth session of the ASEAN Fall Armyworm Action Plan and CABI Biocontrol Workshop Series. Today we're going to be focusing on botanical pesticides. My name is Allison Watson and I'll be moderating the session, and I'm also joined in the background by Fan from CABI, so thank you there for co-hosting the session. And before I start, I just want to say a thank you to some of our key support organisations, especially not only CABI, but also Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade Australia, the ASEAN Secretariat, the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development in Vietnam, and CSIRO, which is the host organisation of the ASEAN Action Plan. Now we have a very busy hour and a half ahead of us. It's going to be a lot of information. We've got three wonderful speakers, and the best way of interacting today is by using the Q&A box. It just helps us to really put the questions all in one place, and it makes it a lot easier for me to moderate and therefore ask those questions to the speakers. The speakers can also answer the questions in writing if we don't have time to ask all of the questions you have in their Q&A slot. Please, though, use the chat box. We really like to hear what you're doing. We'd like you to share your research, your work, any thoughts that you might have more generally about the topic. Please don't be shy. Please use that chat box to do that. And please make sure you introduce yourself to the audience. I will just say that all the videos and recordings from across this series are always saved, and they're actually put at the videos page on the ASEANFAWaction.org website. So you can go back and you'll be able to watch this video from today. You'll also be able to get a PDF copy of all the presentations. And we're up to number 6, as I said. We've only got one more for the year, and that'll be on semiochemicals, and that's in 13th of December. So we've had quite an exciting year, very interesting topics. And I'd like to thank all the speakers now and CABI for helping to organise this up to this point. But focusing on today and the wonderful speakers that we have that you'll see in there, I think they've all got their cameras on. We've got Botanical Insecticides, the disconnect between theory and practice, with Dr. Murray Isman, who's the Professor of Entomology, Toxicology at the University of British Columbia and a real expert. And we're really very appreciative that you could join us, Murray, particularly as I know it's very late in your location at the moment, but it's fantastic to have such an international expert with us. We have Khoa Bach from Vietnam. He is the head of division of the Pesticide, Weed and Environment branch in the Plant Protection Research Institute. And he's going to be giving us a quick sort of presentation around the status of botanical pesticides in Vietnam. He will actually be our third speaker, because in the middle we have Patrick, and Patrick Nguyen, is a researcher at the South China Agricultural University, and he'll be speaking about his latest research that looked at the prospects of botanical compounds and pesticides for fall armyworm control. So 3 very good speakers. I'm really excited. It's going to be very interesting. And really, you've got a diversity of speakers there as well. So I think that's going to bring a lot to the conversation. Now, before we start, I want to do a bit of a poll, and it's, as I say always, it's not a scientific poll. It's really just to get us warmed up. It gives us a bit of time for other people to enter in the room, but it also gets us to know you a little bit. So the first question is, have you worked with or researched botanicals for plant health and protection purposes sometime in the past or now? Yes, no, but I would like to. And I saw somebody say that in their chat introduction, that they weren't, but they would like to in the future. So there we go. You can answer that one. Number 2 is choose the statement that best suits your view. Now, these are always a bit annoying, these sorts of things, because you want to maybe choose both or something in the middle, but I've forced you just to choose 1 or 2. So you have to either say that you we need to spend more time on discovering new botanical insecticides, so you're more in that discovery team, Or statement 2, we need to spend more time on developing botanical insecticides from a targeted number of plants already known to be suitable for producing botanical insecticides. So you're more in that application type of zone. So have a think about it. I know you might not want to answer either of those, but force yourself to choose. And I'm going to give people a little bit more time because we've got 61% of you have participated so far. That's actually really good. Let's see if we can get up to 80%. And I know that'll be a little bit challenging for people who are on their mobile phones because it's not, you can't always do these polls. If that is you and you can't do the poll, please just feel free to put your answer in the chat. And I'm up to 70%. So if a few more of you could, there we go. I can see it now happening. If we can get to the magical 80%, that would be fantastic. And I'm pretty close. So I'm giving you 10 seconds. And I'm going to end the poll. And then I'm going to share the results. So this will be interesting, and I think it's going to be great for Murray's to start his presentation because he's going to be first up. And the first question was, have you worked with or researched botanicals for plant health and protection purposes? We've got 64% say yes. So that's actually a really high sort of amount of people in the room. 23% no, and look, 13% saying no, but I would like to. So there's some enthusiastic participants there as well. For question number two, choose the statement that best suits your view. We've got 30% are really around discovering new botanicals, what's out there. There's lots to discover. Let's go for it. And the second one, 70%, we need to spend a bit more time on some sort of targeted research on developing maybe more of what we know is already out there. So that is a really good introduction for Murray, who's going to be talking a little bit about that subject. So it'll be interesting to see what he thinks about that 70-30% split. And that is going to bring me to the stop sharing. And I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to go on to the start of Murray's presentation. And Murray, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge and expertise. You really are a true international expert in this area, so it's really a privilege for us to have you here. And I'm going to move your slides, so you just tell me when you would like to move to the next slide, and welcome. If Murray is still here. I think he may have just dropped off. So should we give him, I'm going to give him 10 more seconds to come on. Here he is, Murray. Hello. Murray, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, excellent.
We've drifted in and out a couple of times, though, I noticed. I guess that's part of the screen sharing.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think you went missing for a little while, to be honest. So we were still here, but I could not
There
hear.
We go.
There we go. Excellent. So let's start now. Not a problem. So I've got your slides, and you tell me when you would like to move. And thank you.
Perfect. Well, first of all, I should say good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everyone, depending on where you're located around the globe. I see we have a wide distribution of audience members. Nice to have you join us. And I want to thank Allison for inviting me to participate in the webinar. So yes, I've been doing research on botanical insecticides now for actually over 40 years. And looked at both ends of the R&D spectrum. Done a lot of curiosity-driven basic research, discovery research, and also done some very applied research, working in collaboration with industry. And actually, I have developed some products that are in commercial use in the U.S. and and elsewhere. So I have a pretty good expertise and experience working with botanicals. So let's move on to the next one, Allison. And I think it goes without saying, I think all of you will appreciate that terrestrial plants are a rich source of novel chemistry. We like to say that they've been waging chemical warfare against insects and other pests for at least 300 million years. And many of these novel chemicals, or secondary substances, as some people call them, likely evolved as defensive agents against herbivores like insects and plant pathogens. Next one. And so if you look at the scientific history of this in the literature, there's probably at least 100,000 or maybe more of these secondary plant substances or metabolites that we believe a lot of these serve as chemical defense for the plants that produce them. And among those, thousands, and maybe even tens of thousands, have been shown to have demonstrated biological activity against insects, at least in the laboratory. So I know that there's many, many plant natural products that affect insects in some manner. And we can actually generally divide the sorts of bioactivity into two categories. A lot of the bioactivity in insects is behavioral. That is, it modifies the insect's behavior. And it could be through repellents or causing the insects to move away. They can be feeding deterrents, or they can be oviposition deterrents. So they prevent feeding or deter the insect from laying eggs on a plant. And in contrast, the other category are the physiological biological activities. And by these, we mean things like acute toxicity, developmental disruption, and growth inhibition. So actual physiological actions. And sometimes, well, actually, in many cases, these plant natural products that are defensive can have both of these sorts of biological activities. So it's often a lot more complex than we get with a simple conventional chemical insecticide. But in spite of all this research that's been documented on these plant defensive chemicals, there's actually very few botanical insecticides that are in commercial use. Let's move next one. Now, the history of chemical control of insects actually started largely with botanicals, and they predate the discovery of things like DDT and parathion, the synthetic pyrethroids, etc. And the long-established botanicals are, of course, pyrethrum, and pyrethrum continues to be the most widely used botanical worldwide. But some of the other early ones were rotenone and nicotine. But as I've noted here, rotenone and nicotine have largely been discontinued for use for insect control, at least in many countries. A lot more recently, we've had some new botanicals enter the scene. The one that's gotten the most attention, of course, is Neem from the Indian neem tree. Originally, well, historically used in India probably for 2,000 years, sort of rediscovered by Western science in the 1960s, and then commercialized around 1990 in the United States, and then later in Europe. And then in the current millennium, a lot of interest on plant essential oils, and as we'll see, a number of products, insecticidal products based on plant essential oils have been developed. Next one. Back about 8 years ago, I was involved in a bibliometric analysis of the scientific research on botanical insecticides. And Michael Greeneisen at University of California at Davis and I did this study, which we published in Trends in Plant Science. And we looked at publications on botanicals going back about 30 years. And what you see is that at the turn of the new millennium, quite a substantial increase in growth of scientific reports on botanicals. And in particular, very fast growing area of research was the plant essential oils, which are depicted by the green bars you see here. The purple bars are Neem. So there's still a lot of interest in research on Neem, but the essential oils have certainly become pretty dominant in this. And over that complete time period, in 1980, research on botanicals represented about 2% of all the research on insecticides. And by 2011, when we completed our survey, botanical insecticides represented over 22% of the research on insecticides. So there's been tremendous growth in this area. Next one. So the problem, as I view it, is that the majority of the research on botanical insecticides is heavily skewed toward the discovery end of the R&D spectrum. That is, people wanting to find new plants and more plants that contain novel natural products that are insecticidal. So as I said here, you know, an extract or an oil from a certain plant species kills or repels a certain pest species in the laboratory. And there's literally thousands of research reports like this. But the question is, does this actually translate into practice, or does this lead to the development of botanicals that farmers can actually use? And I would argue that in the absence of at least an equal amount of applied research, this wealth of knowledge of pesticidal plants is not being adequately translated into practice so that farmers can use it. Next one. And there are a number of challenges, at least for the commercial development of a new botanical insecticide. And this is the reason why we have so few commercially successful botanicals. And the reason is that once you discover biological activity against an insect in a plant extract or a plant oil, that's only the first of many, many, many steps. And all the rest of the things that need to be done to bring a product into the market are no longer biological questions, but become chemical technology. There's a lot of regulatory issues. A lot of data has to be obtained on environmental fate, on risks against non-target organisms. There's a lot of formulation chemistry that has to be done. And of course, marketing. And all this requires protection of intellectual property, and it requires a lot of resources. In other words, a lot of money. So you have to consider things like the resource availability and sustainability. And generally, if you want to produce something on a commercial scale, you have to be able to actually propagate and cultivate the plants. You have to grow them intentionally to harvest for extraction. You have to understand the active ingredients. So you have to do a fair bit of chemical characterization. You have to find a way to stabilize those chemicals. Often they're volatile or they're readily degraded. And you have to formulate them so they're stable so that you can actually have quality control. You can have a product that has a certain guarantee behind it. And then, as I said, finally, nothing happens, at least in industrialized countries, nothing happens until you get government approval to use these products. Next one. So, believe it or not, if you look at the last 20 years, there's only been this handful of plants, new botanical insecticides that have actually seen commercialization. So we have Matrine and Veratrum, which were developed in China, and there's a third one from Celastris, all developed in China. A couple of these are starting to be marketed in the United States. We have the sweet sop, the Anonas, and Carangan coming out of India, but those products, to the best of my knowledge, are only sold in India. Then we have a number of products based on the resin from hot pepper, from capsicum. There's a product we'll see in a minute developed in South America that's now being sold in the US and in Europe. And the most recent one is this Clitoria, the butterfly pea, which is a product developed in Australia that is just about to be commercialized in Australia and in the United States. Let's move on to the next, please. So these are just some of the examples, and these are the products out of China, matrine and veratrine with quinolizidine and pyrrolizidine alkaloids. The Celastris product contains these very novel sesquiterpenes. Next one. So these are the products I mentioned in India. The Anasom is one of 2 products that's based on extracts of the soursop and the sweet sop, the annona. These compounds called acetogens are extracted from the seeds. And then we have 2 other products, one which contains Sophoro, which was just the source of the matrine alkaloids, and this one called Biochewalk, which comes from Malaysia, which is actually a Daris relative. Next one. And then, as I mentioned, the other group, the most recent group of botanicals are the plant essential oils. Most of these are developed on commodity essential oils that are used as flavorings in our culinary herbs. So they're commonly used in foods and beverages as flavorings. As a result of which, at least in the United States, they're exempt from registration because they're considered normal food additives. So things like rosemary and thyme and mint oils. And all of these have been developed in the US with a couple of other products in Europe and one developed in South Africa. Next, please. So here we have on the upper left a product called Ecotec. I was involved in the development of that product containing rosemary oil and peppermint. I think it's now sold in about 12 countries. The Prevam was the one from South Africa, and it's based on orange oil. So squeezing the rinds or the skins of citrus crops, the waste skins, gives you a very rich oil, very rich in D-limonene. On the bottom left, Captiva Prime. This was the one based on the hot pepper or the capsicum. That product was developed in Colombia and South America, now registered and sold in the US and in Europe. On the bottom right, this Aca Brown is a mixture of several plant oils, and that's a product sold in Mexico. And in the upper right is one called Requiem, and you'll notice that this is from Bayer in Germany, actually was developed in the United States. And this is a mixture of 3 monoterpenes that basically simulate a plant essential oil from a plant called Chenopodium. But they discovered that it was actually easier to synthesize the monoterpenes and blend them together. It was much easier than actually growing the plants and extracting them from the plants. So it's sort of an essential oil lookalike. Okay, next one. And these essential oil insecticides do work, sometimes very well, but not always. Not quite as consistent as you would get with imidacloprid or some other conventional chemical, synthetic chemical. But here's some work, a field trial done in California not too long ago, and you'll see that Ecotec, the essential oil product, actually had comparable bioactivity to pyrethrins against a range of pests, the Bemisia, the sweet potato whitefly, Mysis persicii, the green peach aphid, and also Spodoptera exigua, the beet armyworm. So a fairly useful product. And next slide. This shows a field trial conducted in France by one of the multinational chemical companies who are interested in getting into the botanical field. And Keyplex 063 happens to be a formulation that was developed in my lab in 2016. It's a blend of 3 different oils, or 3 different compounds from oils. And in this case, it actually performed better than the azadirachtin product and almost as good as deltamethrin, the synthetic pyrethroid. So that was quite an encouraging result. Next one. But we have to consider the scale. What sort of agriculture are we talking about? Are we talking about mechanized agriculture for domestic or for export on a large scale, so industrial agriculture? Or are we talking about smallholder food production for local consumption, like you see the young man in East Africa? Because this will determine how botanicals can be used and what sort of what are the necessities to put them into practice. And I in fact have come to the opinion that botanicals are probably more useful for the smallholder farmer than they are for the large industrial farms. Next. So I mentioned all this work on the discovery of new botanical insecticides and not many of them actually getting into practice. So for me, the solution I would propose, or I have talked about in the past, is choose a select number of plants from among the many already well known to be suitable, and then try and focus or resource more research and development on ways to propagate and cultivate those plants, simple, effective, but inexpensive methods for extraction and formulation, straightforward methods to validate the bioactivity, some standard measures of bioactivity, and then ultimately field trials or demonstrations to optimize the efficacy. Now, one of the things that I don't have a slide for, but I should mention is that I said at the beginning that a lot of these plant natural products have both behavioral effects on pests as well as toxic effects or physiological effects. And oftentimes with botanicals, we don't actually know how they're protecting the plant against pests. We know that they're effective, but we don't really know if it's killing the pests or simply driving them away, which is really what nature does. So plant defensive chemistry is actually a very subtle process. It's not nearly as dramatic as what happens when you spray, for example, parathion onto a crop where all the insects drop dead. So we need to better understand and not necessarily expect to see dead insects covering the ground, but appreciate that a lot of these more subtle behavioral influences on insects might actually be contributing quite significantly to crop protection, which should be the end goal, not dead insects. Next one. And there certainly is a long history of knowledge and use of plant extracts for crop protection. So both the government in Thailand and in Brazil have been advocating the use of plant extracts for a long period of time. And these are lists that they have published, those respective governments. And interestingly, there's quite a bit of overlap. So it seems that for example, neem and pyrethrum and peppers and garlic, the same plants keep coming up over and over in different regions of the world. So there's a lot of base knowledge on plants that can be used. Next one. So for example, here's a number of well-known insecticidal plants, Sophora, the one that produces matrine, the pipers, which produce, of course, black pepper, but also a number of isobutyl amides that are known to be insecticidal. Eucalyptus from Australia produces a compound called eucalyptol, which surprisingly is also the major constituent in rosemary oil. Tagetes, the marigold, and then I mentioned the sweet sop, known as squamosa, a few times, and in that case it's the seeds of the edible fruit. The seeds are a waste product, and that's a great way to produce a botanical insecticide is from somebody else's waste. Next one. And then a few well-known insecticidal plants in Africa, Tephrosia vogellii, which produces rotinoids, so it's related to Daris that produces rotenone, quite widely used in East Africa. Osmum is a mint that has good insecticidal properties. Lithia, another member of the mint family, and Tithonia, this small sunflower, also quite effective. Next one. Now, one of the challenges of using botanicals or developing botanicals like anything that comes from a plant, is chemical variability. So there is or can be a lot of chemical variation depending on genetics of the plant, or where it's grown, or the climate it's exposed to. There's many different influences that can alter the chemistry and therefore the efficacy of these plants for controlling insects. So this was a study done by a former graduate student of mine from Maluku in eastern Indonesia with the soursop, and she collected seeds from 10 different communities on her island, brought them to Canada. We extracted them the same way, tested them, and this was in one of the Spodopteras. And you see that there is a tenfold range in biological activities. Some of them were quite effective, some of them were not very effective at all. So you have to be aware of the fact that just because a species of plant is known to be insecticidal, the one that you grind up might not be. You need to know a little bit more about the chemistry. And there's also annual variations. So some of these plants we tested over 4 years, and we found that they certainly weren't equal from year to year. So how do we deal with this kind of variation? What's the answer? How do we get around this problem? The next slide. And here is the answer to that. It's by blending. And this is exactly what the food and beverage industry has been doing for hundreds of years. You take cocoa beans, you want to make a consistent chocolate bar, you get cocoa beans from many different sources and blend them together to get a consistent flavor and aroma profile. Likewise, coffee beans. You want your coffee to taste the same year after year, and you want your brand to always taste the same. You source beans from many sources and blend them together until you get exactly what you want. Likewise with making wine from red or white wine grapes, the same process. You source from many different vineyards, blend them together to get a good consistent product. So, for example, with botanicals, this could work as a village cooperative on a village scale, or it could work on a much larger scale than that. But the way to reduce that variation and get consistency of a product, and therefore consistent performance of a botanical, is typically by blending plant material that's been sourced in a number of places. Next one. So I'll just wrap up. I'm about on my time limit anyhow. So to summarize, I said there's a vast and fast-growing scientific literature suggesting that there's hundreds or thousands of plants that contain natural chemicals that are toxic or deterrent to insects. But in contrast to that, only a small number of botanical insecticides have been successfully commercialized in the past 20 years. And I believe that's because the barriers to commercialization are primarily technical, financial, and legal or regulatory, rather than just the biological issue. And therefore, the disconnect between the theory and practice is a result of, I would say, too much research on the discovery of looking for new plants and new plant chemicals, and not enough research on how we can use botanicals and use plant chemistry for crop protection. And finally, more focus should be placed on the practical utilization of insecticidal plants that are already well known globally. So the next slide, my last slide, I leave you with this aerial view of the University of British Columbia campus, the city of Vancouver back in the background behind it. That's where I had the luxury of spending my career. If I don't get a chance to answer your questions today, that's my email address, and I'm happy to answer questions that people send emails going forward. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Murray. Excellent presentation, just what I expected, and lots of interesting points in there. We've got quite a few questions coming in. A couple of questions to start off with. I mean, you talked about the success rate, sort of the successful commercialization of these botanicals is sometimes quite low, or often quite low. And then you mentioned that I think in 2011, when you finished your sort of review, that there was about 20% of the research on pesticides was on botanicals. Do you have
Correct.
do you have an idea of how much the percentage of that successful commercialization is? Are we talking about 2%, do you think, or
Oh, I think it's
5% or?
less than that, probably less than 5%.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's a small number because, as I said, people, and there's a reason why people spend more research effort on the discovery end, and that's because it's a lot easier to publish something that's considered novel, which is I discovered a plant that has insecticidal properties that no one discovered before, versus saying we tried it on this crop and it worked well, and we tried it on another crop and it wasn't very good against this pest.
Yeah,
it just doesn't have the novelty and the cachet of discovering something new to science. But unfortunately, we're discovering so many things new to science, but they don't really lend themselves or help us with the problem that farmers have, which is getting a product into the farmer's hands that they can afford and that will work.
so that's a good point, and I've heard that before, Murray. And I know that you are an editor and reviewer of lots of different journals. I mean, is that something? Do you think that could be more maybe progressed or supported? Is that more sort of opportunities for people to publish on, the application
I think the best way to enable that is to have the funding agencies actually come out with a clear policy or specific programs that say that we are going to support research on implementation of new pesticides or novel pesticides, rather than saying do research on pesticides and let people discover things. But actually a more targeted or focused funding program that was specifically aimed at the technology transfer or the translation of the laboratory science into field practice.
Yep, no, good point. Here's a few questions here. I'm going to fire out a few to you from the
Sure.
audience. Is there an established half-life for the botanical insecticides, and do they degrade easily in the environment?
The general answer is yes, they tend to degrade or disappear. That is, however, a two-edged sword. We normally think of persistence of pesticides as being a bad thing, but they have to persist long enough to do the job. That was the reason why people took natural pyrethrins and did a lot of chemistry and came up with synthetic pyrethroids, because natural pyrethroids break down in sunlight in a matter of hours. You spray them and by the next day they're completely gone. And so they developed this synthetic type pyrethroids that last much longer. So you need a certain amount of persistence on a plant to actually kill enough of the pests or deter enough of the pests. But generally, yes, the botanicals do not persist for a long time in the environment or on food. So they have the advantage of having little or no harvest restrictions for farm workers, which is a very good thing. But if you have a pest problem where the pest is present for a long period of the growing season, you might need several reapplications. So where a conventional synthetic pesticide, you might need 2 or 3 applications. You might need 6 or 8, say, of an essential oil that is only in the field for 2 days.
Okay, so that's a good point, because there's a question here around, could you elaborate on why you think botanicals are more suitable for small scale farmers than large scale? And when you elaborate on that, could you also sort of talk about, do farmers want to be, or is it hard to encourage farmers to be going out there and doing multiple applications? As you just said, because it requires a bit more work, I guess. Is that a disadvantage?
Yes, it is. Labor is a cost, whether it's dollar cost or time cost. So that's definitely part of the equation. the experience I had visiting a number of projects in East and South Africa indicated that with good field demonstrations, there was a lot of uptake. I mean, the problems for smallholder farmers with conventional pesticides are multifold. The cost is certainly a huge problem. At least, the contemporary chemicals that are used, say, in Europe and North America, are beyond the resources of most smallholder farmers. Mm-hmm. The other problem is that those chemical products can be fairly dangerous to use, and typically smallholder farmers would never have the sort of safety equipment proper. I mean, I showed a slide of the young lad with the backpack sprayer with bare feet and wearing shorts. I mean, in North America or Europe, they'd be wearing a full hazmat suit practically to spray pesticides. So, there's a big safety concern, and the World Health Organization has all kinds of data showing that the vast majority of pesticide poisonings worldwide happen in developing countries with smallholder farmers. The chemicals are not stored properly. They're not mixed properly. And there's a whole problem of literacy. Can people read labels in German or French or English? So,
but does that make another difficulty for botanicals sometimes? I mean, because around the storage difficulties, the shelf life. I mean, that means it requires a lot more education.
There's definitely compromises on both sides. So botanicals. The advantage of botanicals is for a smallholder is that they actually can grow or harvest the plants themselves, make a simple concoction with water and liquid dish soap, and use it immediately.
Yeah.
And
so a question there, Murray.
Enough plant material that alleviates a lot of those other sort of technical issues.
Just going back to your presentation, it was very interesting, this idea of blending. And I really liked that slide of your student who had showed that even with the same plant, the different locations of where it was collected from showed a huge variation in the sort of quality, I guess, of the insecticidal properties. My question there is it realistic, therefore, for farmers in different communities to be really growing small amounts of some of these botanicals and then having a quality product at the end of it? How do you ensure that then?
So I think I used the term village cooperative. If you could get several farmers working together to collect plants and mix the whole thing together, at least you're going to have consistency. It might lower the efficacy for some people, but at least their expectations would be realistic.
Yeah.
And there's lots of different models of how collectives can work. The classic recent case of this was the plant Tephrosia in East Africa. There's very distinct chemotypes or chemical races, and the original work I think was done in Kenya and Tanzania. Then they tried it in Malawi and it didn't work at all, and it turned out that they had a chemotype that didn't produce the insecticidal constituents. So you can understand how people would have been confused and disappointed. And that's why you really, at some level, have to be able to do chemical characterization or have someone do a standardized bioassay. So you don't even have to have, the chemical analysis. If you have a very consistent bioassay, at least you have a yardstick to use, and then you can say this batch of plants works for us. This batch of plants won't work for us. If we mix them together, we might have something that still remains useful for more people.
Great.
But botanicals they're not a panacea. They don't solve all the problems. They have their own issues that have to be dealt with. And you mentioned education. I mean, a big part of putting botanicals into the hands of farmers is educating them, just because they have these different modes of action compared to traditional chemical insecticides.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's very important. Look, extremely interesting. Your work, the breadth and depth of your work across the many years is so impressive, and it's so nice to have you join us. I just want to leave a tiny little bit of time at the end for you to give some key thoughts. So I'm going to move on, but I can see that you've got 11 questions in the Q&A, and you've got some hellos there from people who know you as well, and some very good questions. I see Pierre has got a good question there for you around IP, and it would be interesting to think about that sort of access and benefit sharing sort of type things, and I guess transfer of some of these botanicals across countries could be interesting as well. But thank you so much, Murray. I'm going to move on to our next speaker, but please stay with us. Thank you.
You bet.
I'm just going to stop my share.
Yeah.
Excellent. So I'm just going to introduce Dr. Khoa. Bach, and he's going to be speaking and giving us a bit of a status report on what's happening in Vietnam. This is going to be very interesting because it will be quite a good discussion, I think, at the end with Dr. Khoa and Murray, in talking about going forward, what is the work going to be focusing on, and what are the opportunities. Dr. Khoa?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon from Vietnam. So my name is Dr. Khoa. I'm working in the Plant Protection Research Institute. So I am the head of department, the pesticide, weed and environment. So now I would like to present about current status of using the botanical pesticide in Vietnam. So the first of all, I would like to talk about the system for the management of and usage of the pesticide in Vietnam, because it's very important. Because the pesticide, including the botanical pesticide, and how the Vietnamese government is the regulator of the botanical pesticide in Vietnam. So you can see in the slide that the first is the Ministry of, in Vietnam, we have a plant protection law. And after law, we have a decree issued by government. And we have a circular issued by the Ministry of the Agriculture. And Plant Protection Department, the main point of the regulate of the regulation or the management and the usage of pesticide in Vietnam. So under plant protection, we have the regulate of the company for production and trading pesticide. And after the company production and trading, it may be agency for selling pesticide and to the farmer or the service team using pesticide. And another thing for the government is plant protection sub-department, and it belongs to the province. And thereafter is the agricultural service center. It belongs to the award, is the lower down, and maybe to the farmer and service team. So they are the react together, and how to improve the pesticide, including the biopesticide in Vietnam. So Plant Protection Department, they regulate the most of the pesticide production and usage in Vietnam, including register and removal of pesticide. So in Vietnam, either it's the 1 year or 2 years, the plant protection, they win the review, and maybe they can register the new one or the remove the old one. The register new one or removal, they control by under the control of the pesticide. So many the researchers, they suggest either they suggest the register new one or remove the new one. After that, either the plant protection also the management pesticide production, and they also the management of quality of the pesticide. And the reaction between the company with the plant protection and PPD and PPD with the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Semen, and with the farmer or the people, they can issue or submit the document for pesticide management, or they can change. Actually, the change is a very it's a very long time to change the one. So in Vietnam, we have about at the moment in the 2021, we have a totally about 1,647 is the technical pesticide, with either 4,300 the trade name. So many, but almost is the chemical pesticide, about 90.7% of the chemical pesticide, and only the 2.5% of botanical pesticide, and about the 3.8% the biopesticide. And in Vietnam, the circular divide the pesticide into three main kind of pesticide. One is the chemical pesticide. The other is another is the biopesticide. Biopesticide, they divide it two main. One is the botanical pesticide, and the other is the microbiological pesticide and natural product pesticide. And in Vietnam, if you want to register the botanical pesticide, that means the botanical pesticide, they divide the two sources. One is from import, is the technique, the botanical pesticide overseas. That either they indicate that it's the chemical pesticide, not botanical pesticide. But in Vietnam, if you produce in Vietnam with the raw material or the extract by the methanol or the water, that means it's a botanical. And for registration in botanical produced in Vietnam, the more easily than either for important the technical pesticide, botanical the pesticide overseas, because they need the document is a little the type of toxicological the environment. So here is in Vietnam, we have a totally registered for testing about the 30 technical botanical pesticide, and including about the 200 the trade name. And you can see the botanical, the first is the agent reductive, about maybe the 15 is the trade name. And the next is about the essential oil. For example, citric oil, the corn oil, or the cottonseed oil, or the garlic oil, and eucalyptus and garlic zeal, and the metrin. The next is the pyrethrin, metrin. The metrin is the extra. Metrin is also is the most popular is the register in and the trading in Vietnam. And the third is the pyrethrin, and fourth is the rotenone, and finally the saponin. So in Vietnam, we register many kind of the technical, the botanical, and with the many of the trade name, but most of them is the import from the overseas. For example, from China and from India. That means if you want to register for this one, you have to register the document similar with the chemical. So it's very difficult to register the botanical, the pesticide in Vietnam. And also, as you know that for the biodegree of the technical botanical pesticide is short. So maybe the import if and store it a long time, maybe efficiency the reduce. So that's why in Vietnam we register many, but either in the field not many the high efficiency of the botanical pesticide in Vietnam, and almost of the botanical pesticide they register to control in the rice, in the tea, and in the fruit and in the vegetable. So with the industrial, the crop is not many. So for example, they register to control the diamond black, strip, aphis, red, the spy miner, and here you can see also some product they mix. For example, they mix azadirachtin with the machine and essential oil with the potash, because some is the natural product from the for example from the soil or from another source, for example from the animal, they can mix and they can control the many kind of the insect, for example with the caffeine and no nicotine, and azadirachtin they can control the smell, and also they can control the insect and also the control the fungi and the bacteria or a virus.
Three minutes. Dr.
Yeah. Okay. This is okay. Next. In Vietnam I think we registered so many, but as you know that botanical efficiency is not too high, and normally the price is very high because we have to import. But in Vietnam, you know that in Vietnam we have many kind of the plant, we can extract. Most of the botanical is the popular that you in Vietnam we can grow, but only the some, for example, machine we cannot grow in the plant to extract machine and the pyrethrin in Vietnam. But almost the plant we can grow. Example, in the Mekong River Delta we can grow the very easy about the dairy that extract for the rotenol, and in the south of the central of Vietnam we can grow the Neem, and the Neem the azadirachtin in the Neem grow in the south of Vietnam, south central of Vietnam, a very high of azadirachtin, maybe from the around the 2.2 the 0.2 the percent to 0.3% of the azadirachtin. So it's a very high quality of the resource. And also the people, and there are many kind of, for example, many kind of the plant we can grow. But in Vietnam, as you know, the extract the method is very important. Extract method, because most of the pesticide the botanical in Vietnam we research in the laboratory, but the produce for commercial is not so many. But normally the government they support the research and develop the botanical pesticide, and in particular or biopesticide. They encourage the researcher and to collaborate with the company to develop the new one, or to develop of the company to extract of the botanical pesticide. And in Vietnam, before the consumer they don't care about the product, but normally the most of the intercity they concern about the organic agriculture, the organic product, and some either now some either system of the market or of the market, they can sell the organic product. So the organic product in the market may be the price than in the agricultural product. So I think in the near future in Vietnam, we can develop very quick or the high of the botanical, because we have a resource and we apply the new technique. For example, in my institute, we use the new technique. For example, we use the new solvent to extract and the material to extract, and we develop the new of the formulate of the botanical formulation. For example, we use the nano, we use the polymer, the polymer, we use polymer to collect of the chemical botanical pesticide, and the increase of the efficiency and the high quality in Vietnam. So
1 minute, Dr. Khoa.
Yeah. So advantage in the pesticide botanical in pesticide in Vietnam, that is the efficiency, biological efficiency, economic efficiency lower compared with chemical. And botanical pesticides are normally the difficult storage and using, and it's very difficult to change the farmer habitat about the using of the chemical pesticide. And also it's very difficult to register the new botanical pesticide in Vietnam. So that is I would like to present some information of botanical pesticide in Vietnam. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Dr. Khoa, thank you so much. That's really fascinating, and I'm interested. We're going to have a bit of a sort of final few thoughts from Murray as well, that'll tie the presentations together. But it's very fascinating to see what's happening in Vietnam. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to ask you a few quick questions, and then we're going to go back to Patrick's presentation. One question is, you talked about consumers, the demand for these for organic or low residue food increasing. Do you see Vietnamese farmers, do they like to use botanicals? Do you see them accepting and using botanicals in the field?
So I think the farmer, upon the how can I say the benefits. If the farmer, they get the high benefit for growing the organic pesticide, organic of the agricultural production, they can grow and they can apply the botanical pesticide. So upon the benefit, and also they have a system. They have a system to connect between the consumer with the grower, with the farmer growing the pesticide, the growing the crop or the vegetable or something like this.
Another question here is do you see more research in Vietnam now on botanicals than compared to 5 years ago? Is there growing interest within the research community in Vietnam?
Yes. For example, because you know that the information and the technical and maybe the material now more easy than the before. So I think now not only the researcher but also the company, they would like to produce the botanical, the pesticide to sell in the market.
Okay, excellent. Here's a question here. Is there a traditional use of plant extract in Vietnam for plant or animal health or even pisciculture? So if yes, in which crop or storage seeds?
For the botanical, the result or
A traditional use. So is there in the past a traditional use of plant extract in Vietnam?
Normally now we extract the chili and the garlic and the neem and the radish.
Yeah.
And the essential oil.
Okay.
Essential oil. We also, because in Vietnam, you know that the climate and topography is very diversity. So from north to south, we grow many kind of the botanical, the pesticide plants.
Yep.
Yeah.
A question here, is the cost of botanical insecticides cheaper compared to conventional insecticides in Vietnam? And if not cheaper, what will motivate the farmers to use them?
The price.
So is it cheaper? Yeah, the price. Is it cheaper to buy a botanical insecticide compared to conventional insecticide?
Either upon the formulation, because you know that some of the botanical pesticide, the farmer they can extract. They use the methanol or the water they can extract by themselves.
Yep.
But for the formulation high the quality, it normally the higher the price the higher than the chemical, the pesticide.
Yep. Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Khoa. Just wait there. You have a few questions on the Q&A. If you could go in and perhaps with Murray answer a few of those. I think you have 2 questions at the end. You could have a go in writing, but if not, we'll come back. So I'm just going to move on to our next speaker, to Patrick again. But thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today. We really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for attention.
Thank you. Patrick, are you there? Have you managed to join us again? Because I've gone to the slide where we ended up. Can you see it?
Yes, I see it.
So hopefully, Patrick, you can start. This is not looking good at the moment. Patrick? It actually gives us a bit of time to actually answer some questions, because I see that Murray has a lot in there. I see Dr. Khoa is already answering a question. Thank you. So Murray, do you want to come back on if you're around? Hopefully we've got you there.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to sort of go right through the list to the sort of summary page. And why don't we use this time, because actually we don't have too much time left, and just talk about what are some of the key things. I mean, you saw Dr. Khoa's presentation too. I mean, there's a bit happening there as well. Thinking about that presentation, thinking about the opportunities for new botanicals, where do you see sort of opportunities for collaborating more, maybe across countries, and what would be some of those challenges?
Well, certainly the most formidable challenge, at least for the commercial products, the high quality products, is the regulatory status, the regulatory approval, and the fact that different jurisdictions, different countries have their own set of rules, and there's very, very little harmonization, even between the European Union and the US, or between the US and Canada. There's surprisingly little harmonization. And this just adds the cost onto the manufacturers. You know, if they want to market in several countries, they literally have to have a regulatory team, in-house regulatory team, that spends all their time just trying to get approval of their products in different countries. And so, you know, for the higher quality products, the manufacturers, you know, have to carefully consider if the market's going to be big enough to justify putting that effort in to get regulatory approval. And I know there are some countries that are looking at different sort of a more lenient view. Australia actually has a long exemption list for essential oils and a few other botanicals that are not oils, in their I forget what their regulatory system is called.
Yeah.
But that's very encouraging. On the other hand, Canada, where I've done all my research, just recently rejected the Ecotec product, which is the one with rosemary oil and peppermint oil.
Yeah.
Sort of shocked us that they rejected it after 2 years of review. They found some obscure reference somewhere on rosemary having some sort of reproductive effect on rats, which doesn't seem to have been verified or duplicated anywhere else. But they came back with a lot of questions and wanted to see more studies done on reproductive work in rats. And, you know, the company just said it's too, the market in Canada is too small to make it worthwhile. We'll go somewhere else. We'll go to Mexico. We'll go to Turkey. We'll go to the Emirates, you know, Uruguay. These are all countries they've been successful in.
Yeah.
So there needs to be, what's interesting and also frustrating, the European Union, European Food Safety Authority has been very vocal about policy about getting green pesticides into the field, but their own regulatory arm seems to be doing everything they can to block it. So the politicians maybe think it's a good idea, but the people doing the reviews seem to be placing even more hurdles now. So now,
is there sort of, I mean, obviously they're not always safe. I mean, and we saw some of those examples of early botanical pesticides that aren't
absolutely true.
You know,
so I mean, things like nicotine. Nicotine is a very dangerous product used. You
so
know,
it's important to stress that
strychnine is another one that's very dangerous to humans. So, you know, natural does not equal safe.
Yeah.
But typically a lot of the botanicals, most of the ones that are used today have some history of traditional human use, somewhere indigenous use. So there is sort of an assumption of safety, or like the essential oils, they're used in food products and beverages worldwide.
Okay.
So again, there's a margin of safety because there's a lot of information on their use for these other purposes, and there's a lot of sort of known human exposure.
Okay, so a couple of questions, Murray, because we've got quite a few here. So I'm just going to cut you off, sorry, there briefly, but we'll come back to some other points that are sort of related. But can insects develop resistance to plant botanicals in the long run? And what is the recommended re-entry period for botanical pesticides?
So one of the benefits of the essential oil pesticides is there's essentially no re-entry restrictions at all. Because within 24 hours of application, it's safe enough for farm workers to handle anything that's been sprayed with them. Yep. Given the rates that are applied and known human exposures to these oils.
It's a huge benefit.
It is a huge benefit, and especially in controlled environments like in greenhouses, you know, where you have a sort of closed system, that's especially beneficial.
Yeah. Resistance.
Some of the other ones like Neem, their persistence on crops is measured in sort of 2 to 5 days, but typically because they're relatively safe to humans, the re-entry periods are minimal, maybe 24 hours again, 24, 48 hours. The question about resistance is a really interesting one. We did a study that we published, 25 years ago with azadirachtin. And what we did was we challenged populations of green peach aphid in our greenhouse with a formulation that was pure azadirachtin. And we challenged another line of aphids with a neem insecticide that had the same amount of azadirachtin as the pure azadirachtin one we tested. And then we did a control, so a blank treatment. And lo and behold, after about 6 months, we started to get resistance to pure azadirachtin in the aphids. So there's nothing magical, but the really exciting result was that the neem insecticide, even though it had the same amount of azadirachtin, showed no resistance at all.
Wow. Oh, that's interesting.
And that's because I think when you have combinations of active ingredients, you have complex mixtures, and most of the essential oils are also complex mixtures of small molecules. It diffuses the selection pressure on the insect's physiological systems. So it sort of has too many things to deal with, It can't focus on evolving resistance to one chemical. But I believe, and that study showed it with azadirachtin, but I believe that if you took any single chemical and exposed insect populations over and over and over and over with a single chemical, the insects would evolve resistance. So one of the benefits of using botanicals is typically they're complex mixtures. Now, that's an advantage in terms of the resistance, but it's a disadvantage in terms of registering the product, because typically the government agencies want to see the chemical composition in a lot of detail, which is often too complex for people to even do it.
Yep. Okay, Murray, I've got some quick fire questions for you. So you're going to have to be, we're going to get through a few here. So what size of companies, and this is an interesting question, what size of companies are developing botanical insecticides? Is it large multinationals, large national companies, or smaller specialized SMEs, for example?
Typically startups, smaller startups. What happens is, if they have the resources to develop a product that looks like it's going to be successful and do field trials and ultimately get into the regulatory queue in European Union or the US or Japan, what typically happens then is they have a little bit of success and the multinationals come in and acquire them. They get absorbed by the multinationals. The multinationals, the obviously, the big names, the Bayers and Syngentas of the world and Sumitomo's.
Yeah.
They're getting a lot of pressure from their shareholders, the publicly listed companies. Their shareholders want them to be green. So what the multinationals do, they'll go out and find a successful small company that's developed a botanical or another bioinsecticide, like a microbial, and they'll just buy the company. And then they can tell everyone that, our portfolio includes natural products, green pesticides.
But on the positive side, they also have the resources to scale up.
Absolutely.
Because it does, as you know, and it costs a huge amount of, money sometimes, let's be honest, to produce these at scale. So, and they have the expertise, whereas startup, not always. So there's pluses and minuses. Here's a question here that's quite interesting. If we do cocktailing of the botanicals, such as your blends, which I quite liked, I did like the wine and the coffee examples. I like both, but would they not degrade the potency of each other?
Yes, but the point is, unless you have real elite lines of plants that are high producers of the desired chemicals, in the end, you're better off getting a large amount of resources and combining them.
Yeah.
Because the elite plants might be much slower growing or much more difficult to propagate than the other populations of the same plant species. So you might be compromised in trying to produce a lot of a high quality. So that's certainly the case. My argument is you're better having something that's standard and consistent, and farmers will adjust their expectations based on the performance in their own hands, rather than having a hit and miss proposition of someone's going to sell you some plant material that is actually very effective, but the next time you buy it, it doesn't work at all.
Okay.
And that's typically what turns off a lot of farmers when they try using bioinsecticides, is their expectations are based on using imidacloprid or, parathion or deltamethrin or whatever. And, the first time they use a botanical, how come all the insects aren't dead? They're still on the plant.
Yeah.
Well, like, for example, you spray azadirachtin, the insects don't die for 3 or 4 days, but they stop feeding almost immediately, which means that they stop damaging the plants almost immediately. So
yeah, good point.
You have to be thinking of efficacy in a much broader sense.
Yeah.
We did some work. So when we started doing the essential oil work, we were testing them against 2-spotted spider mite, major pest everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And we found in the lab that they were very good contact miticides, but they had almost no persistence on the plants at all. So if you sprayed them, they'd kill the mites immediately, or maybe for 4 or 5 hours. But after that, they wouldn't kill the mites at all. But when we went out in the field and we sprayed them on actual farms, we would get protection of the crop for sometimes up to 3 weeks with a single application. And we know it's not killing them anymore.
Yeah.
But what's it doing? It's pushing them away. It's pushing them off the plants, or it's preventing them when they land on the plant, they jump off the plant.
Yeah.
Because
So
the
it's having
plant's no longer
a physical and a physiological, I mean,
there's a big repellent.
behavioral.
There seems to be a big repellent aspect of it that's very hard to measure in the lab, but we think actually is very important in the field.
No, that's really, and that's fascinating. And I think that answers a few other questions as well in our chat. Just if your question isn't answered yet, and I see there's quite a few, what we might do is actually answer those after the session and post them up as part of the session. I'm sure Murray will help us do that because there's a lot of interest. Before we go, Murray, it was interesting to see what Vietnam's doing there, and I think that's really heartening to see the interest in the botanicals there. I've got a question. It'd be good, just a quick comment. You've only got 1 minute though, so I just put that frame around. But I guess as seeing, reviewing lots of journals, being an editor, etc., what's the most exciting thing, if you had to sort of leave us with one exciting thing that's happening at the moment, or that you're seeing across the sort of kind of new frontiers of research? What would that be?
It's definitely the nano formulations, nanoparticles being used, because they seem to protect the botanicals, make them a little more persistent, and in some cases more efficacious against pests. So the formulation turns out to be very important for botanicals. And there's a lot of great research being done in Europe, in Brazil, in the UK, on nanotechnology and nano formulation, which I think will make these products much more efficacious and useful for farmers.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Murray, and thank you for coming on at the end there. And we've only scratched the surface. I can see there's a lot of people wanting to ask you questions. And Dr. Khoa, thank you so much. I saw you answered some questions as well, and there's a lot of interest around what Vietnam's doing, and also this enthusiasm to really boost botanicals and their use in Vietnam. So we're going to keep a close eye on that and come back to see where Vietnam is maybe in a year's time, and really focus on that from a Southeast Asian perspective. So thank you for joining. For Patrick, look, if you're with us, I think I've actually been WhatsApping him, and I'll just say to everyone, he was actually quite disappointed that he couldn't present, because he was very keen to be presenting along with Dr. Khoa and Murray today. Because it was a really great chance for him as he's doing his doctorate to really sort of show everyone what he's doing. So he was very disappointed, but I'm going to make that up to him and make sure we video his presentation and attach it to this session so everyone can see what he's working on, and more information around botanicals for fall armyworm control. Look, thank you so much for joining us, all three speakers today. It's a pleasure. Thank you, Murray, for being in the morning. I know it's very late. It's probably 1 a.m. Over there in British Columbia. But you've got a very nice campus there with that picture of your university. So I'm a bit jealous. So not so bad when you have a working place like that. So thank you very much. And thank you for all of you who joined us. Thank you to Cabby. Thank you to Fang for joining as well, and being in support there. And also Zhao, thank you very much. Be safe, everyone. If you've got questions, don't be shy to email me. We will record this session, of course. We have recorded it, and we'll post it up, and we'll be in contact. And I hope to see you at our next workshop on the 13th of December, where we finish the year with another good session, and it'll be on semiochemicals. So that'll be fantastic. Thank you very much, and take care, everyone.
Thank you, Allison. Yep. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Bye, everyone.
Yeah.